I'll try to wrap this up pretty quickly. Oops, sorry.
They're waving at you.
I heard. I could feel it back there. It was like a breeze, a nice one. Laughter. I said, and so everybody can hear it again, I'll try to wrap this up rather quickly, I think. The break helped me do that. I just want to go back and address a couple other items on the conspiracy, and then I'll turn my attention, and I want to say this at the outset. I believe that we correctly analyzed the state of the law to the court when we started this, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't address at least some of the factual credibility issues that were raised by the defense, but I really don't believe that that's pertinent to this particular proceeding, but there's some things I think need to be clarified about what was said. I'm not going to do it in detail. I'm just going to hit some highlights about things, so. First of all, I just want to get back to the conspiracy. I think there's another thing that needs to be noted about the associates that the defendant was involved with in these particular adventures that I think that bears some noteworthiness or some reasonable inferences in this case. A lot has been made about the fact that Mark Schaffel was a person of low credibility, and there's been evidence that he may have taken $1 million that he shouldn't have taken from a lady in Japan, and that Dieter and Ronald may have taken money from Mr. Jackson, a lot of conversations about that. But I got to tell you that the one thing that stands out about that in relationship to this case is that if you're going to be involved in a conspiracy to save your career, you're not going to go out and try to hire somebody to help you that's honest. If you're going to try to extort something out of somebody, if you're going to try to control and isolate individuals and falsely imprison them and move them around and keep their kids away from them, you're going to get the kind of people that you know are willing to do things that are dishonest. These are people that the defendant's been associated with for many, many years, and he knows their character, and he knows what they're capable of. Or you can out and find somebody who is blindly loyal to you, who you can trust implicitly, because it's somebody who will be at your side and has been at your side and will always be at your side no matter what you request of them. Somebody like Frank Tyson. Those are the kind of people that go to making up a conspiracy of this type with the stakes that are this large. And I think it needs to be clarified that when, in relationship to Mr. Jackson knowing about what goes on, Mr. Sanger glossed over the testimony in this case where he said, even Rudy Provencio said that he doesn't always know what's going on with Ronald and Dieter and Mark Schaffel. Well, that's not exactly what his testimony was. What his testimony was is that in relationship to what was going on from the crisis from the Bashir tape, that Mr. Jackson was in the information loop and in that loop regularly. That the things, if you check the transcript, the things that he said that Jackson didn't know about were the other ventures that these people had going on that did not involve this particular crisis. But he was very clear in his testimony that as to this particular crisis, Mr. Jackson was in that loop, and he was in that loop on a regular basis. I think the other thing that needs to be borne out about much that Mr. Sanger makes about scripted. I guess the difference is, and I think perhaps there's some legitimacy to this, given the fact that Mr. Jackson's an entertainer, that there's a common sense meaning for scripted, and then there's an entertainment meaning for scripted, I would think. The fact of the matter is, whatever way you want to put it, that Debbie Rowe interview was not a legitimate, truthful interview by any stretch of the imagination. And why it should take somebody 9.5 hours to say something nice about the defendant is beyond me. And why they should have to stop the tape and say that, you didn't cry well enough, so we'll go back and cry again. Now if that's not scripted in the common sense term, I don't know what is. And I think that proves just the point we were trying to make with the Janet Arvizo tape is, whether you talk about it's written, or it's not written, and for Pete's sake, look at the photograph that's in evidence. There's papers all over that room. You see Mark Schaffel sitting on the ground writing. They weren't doing their income tax returns. Those were scripts of questions. Now, whether you want to technically say that they were, that something was told to be said this way and that way, obviously they tried to do that. They just weren't successful with her. She was going to tell the lie that she and the defendant made up years ago. And she was going to stick to that, and she was going to tell it her way. It wasn't that they didn't want it another way. I think another thing that needs to be borne out with regard to something I said earlier this morning, Your Honor, and that's with regards to this ranch sign, the one that said Gavin can't leave, the one that's in the logs. I don't think there's a shred of evidence in this case that indicates that Mark Schaffel has the kind of power to tell Joe Marcus what to do at that ranch and to tell the people what to put in those logs. It was Joe Marcus who said the kids can't leave the ranch. And who does Joe Marcus report to? He reports to the defendant in this case, not to Mark Schaffel. I'd like to just finish up by addressing just a few, and I'm not going to go into all of that, because I don't think there's any sense in doing final arguments on a day like this, particularly when I don't believe the credibility issues are on point. But I think there's some things that need to be clarified, and frankly, this is a good opportunity to say this. I am offended and I'm sick and tired of the defense standing up in this case, as they've done for months and months and months and months, saying that they don't take it lightly when they accuse somebody of perjury. They said this when they accused me of perjury. They said that when they accused me of suborning perjury. They accused Mr. Auchincloss of that. And now they're accusing Mr. Zonen of some impropriety. I think they do take it lightly, and the fact of the matter is, there's a common denominator. Anybody who stands in their way, whether it's Janet Arvizo, Gavin Arvizo, Star Arvizo, Devellin Arvizo, Rudy Provencio or anybody else in this case that says one thing bad about the defendant in this case are perjurers. I don't think the law of coincidence is that high. None of us get anything out of this except a lot of grief. So to say that they don't take it lightly I think is nonsense, and I'd like to show you why some of these things are nonsense. If Rudy Provencio is a media guy, he works in the media. He knows the media. Now, if he wanted to go get a notebook and make up a bunch of things about Michael Jackson and implicate him in this case, all he has to do is go to smokinggun.com, download the grand jury transcripts, have an accurate depiction of every single event that occurred in this case and a date reference, and he could have made up the greatest notebook in the world and came in here and testified it.
Your Honor, excuse me, I'm just going to object to keep it on track. This argument is limited to the evidence that's before the jury at the conclusion of the people's case. So I don't want to object unnecessarily, but I think we're going afield from that particular issue talking about the smoking gun and things that are not in evidence.
Overruled. Go ahead.
He could have gone out and constructed a notebook that would have been devastating to the defense in every respect. Every date right, every event, every conversation. He could have manufactured conversations that occurred between he and Chantal, or he and the defendant, or any other parties to this conspiracy that occurred, not only just the two he testified to. He could have made up other conversations if he wanted to be a hero in this case and a perjurer in this case and to do the defendant in this case. That just doesn't hold water, like the pay, with a big hole in it. If he wanted to be the hero, and one thing, if you could tell, he's not a dumb person. He didn't need to do it that way. And probably the reason and the more likely reasonable inference is he did it that way because that's the truth and that's the way it happened. And people do things at certain points in time and they're not looking back that there's going to be a trial. There was no investigation going on when he took these notes. There was just a crisis going in the media over the defendant and his career. This timeline change makes Gavin a liar. Let's put it in perspective, if we can. First and foremost, this whole thing about there's no disclosure until after they go to the lawyers and after they go to Dr. Katz. Well, actually there wasn't a disclosure even with Dr. Katz, so there was nothing for the lawyers to muck around with because he doesn't disclose to Dr. Katz. As you recall, Dr. Katz's testimony as he got very emotional, and he terminated the conversation because he felt something had happened, but he didn't want to go any further. The first disclosure was to law enforcement. Now, what's the testimony in that case about the disclosure to law enforcement? The testimony elicited by the defense, Mr. Sanger himself did it, elicited from Sergeant Roble, when he was testifying, was they, Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department, after having received the information from Mr. Feldman that there had been a report made, or that was the report, to be more accurate, tried to get this family to come to Santa Barbara in order to do an interview with them to see whether or not anything had happened. In other words, to follow up on that responsibility because they had received a mandated report. And what did he say? They didn't want to be involved. They didn't want to come. They didn't want to do it. And, now, does that sound like a family that has a lawsuit on their mind? Or does that sound like a family that just wants to be left alone, that's tied up in this thing now there was a mandated reporter involved? It just doesn't hold water. And the timeline never changed. The timeline was, as the testimony disclosed from Gavin, that was consistent with his grand jury testimony, which was consistent with his trial testimony, that he told Sergeant Roble early on during the investigation, that the crimes, the molestations occurred during February and March. Gavin doesn't pick the time period. The prosecutors pick the time period that's involved. Now, before the grand jury, Gavin testified to 2 incidents involving the defendant. And what he told the grand jury and what he told the jury here is, I believe that I was molested on other occasions. I have a feeling that I was, which is what he was talking about to Sergeant Roble in an interview. But, he said, I have to testify under oath. Under oath, I only remember 2. Now, does that sound like something that a perjurer would do? My lord, the only 2 people present when all this happens is the defendant and Gavin. He could have made up 20 allegations if he wanted to. He could have made up more horrendous things if he wanted to. Instead, the kid's honest enough to say, I think it might have happened on other occasions, but Lord, I'm not going to come in here under oath and say something against Mr. Jackson that I don't believe that I can credibly say without doubt. And that's what he did. And they want you to believe that he's a perjurer because he did that? That doesn't make sense, like a lot of the things that the defense is urging in this case. I just want to clarify 2 other things and I'm about to sit down, Your Honor. With regard to Janet, and I'm not going to be an apologist for Janet Arvizo. I'm also not going to sit here and tell you that I think that she's a perjurer or that she's willfully false in her testimony. I will tell you that, as I think has been clear and from a lot of things that happened, that she is a woman who projects a person who has been involved in a domestic relationship with a lot of abuse for 16 years. And it's showing, and it showed here in the courtroom. And I think it's a little unfair for counsel to stand up here and say that Janet created false information about her husband beating her up, created false information about a molestation, just like happened in this case, from what happened before, when there is public records that exist that show that her husband was publicly convicted, beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty, of not 1, but 2 offenses of abusing not only her, but her daughter. And that a judge, a neutral magistrate, was so offended by the conduct that he took away visitation rights for that father for 3 years, along with a lot of other things that happened. Now, that's a little unfair. That's a tad unfair to say somebody's a perjurer and somebody's setting up the defendant, Michael Jackson, when there's objective proof of the fact that what she said was truthful. And this whole thing about the sexual molestation, can anybody forget? Can you forget? I'm sure you haven't. Can anybody forget? Any of these people who are sitting here, hearing Devellin on the stand talk about that conversation involving her mother and herself and her father where her father confesses to her that he molested her when she was a child and she breaks down and she cries. Can anybody forget that? And that makes her a perjurer? That makes Janet a perjurer for making up something that actually happened? I just tell the court, you know, it's things like this, all the way through this case, that when you look at this thing with the standard, not only eventually, but right now, that's required of this court, I could stand up here for another 2 hours and make a final argument to you just like Mr. Sanger did, and I could go through point by point by point and show you the unreasonableness of their position, and I think I've just given you some isolated examples of just what I'm talking about. And I just submit to the court that given the standard in this case and given the evidence before this court, that this jury ought to be able to be given the opportunity to decide for themselves the credibility of these issues, of these witnesses, given the totality of the circumstances, and that's the very standard that the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court sets out for an 11-18 motion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. No, counsel, you don't need to stand.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The court's going to deny the 11-18 motion. The request to dismiss the charges is denied. I'm going to bring in the jury. Are you prepared to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Excuse me, Your Honor? There's a motion in Lamine that the prosecution made about a couple witnesses we plan to call.
They don't seem to be the first 2.
They're not the first 2.
So I'll put that off. Get the jury in.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon.
In unison, good afternoon.
You may proceed.
Judge, we need to swear the witness.
All right, please raise your right hand and face the clerk.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Wade J. Robson, spelled W-A-D-E, initial J, R-O-B-S-O-N.
Thank you.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good afternoon, Mr. Robson.
How you doing?
How old are you?
I am 22.
And would you please just summarize your employment history?
My employment history. I started dancing when I was 2, professionally when I was 5. In Australia originally, and moved to America when I was 8. Became a professional dancer. Started teaching dance classes when I was 12. I was in a rap duo when I was 11 and 12. Started choreographing for different artists when I was 14, and now I'm directing film.
And where do you live at the moment?
I live in Tarzana, California.
Okay, and you say you're directing films?
Yeah.
And can you summarize what you're doing in that regard?
The main focus right now, I did a short film that I wrote and produced and directed last year, and that's doing the whole film festival circuit right now. And I have a 3-picture deal with Disney as a film director, and we're developing an original musical.
Do you know the fellow seated at council table to my right?
Yes.
And who is that?
That's Michael Jackson.
How do you know him?
I met him first when I was 5 years old. I think it was 87. And Michael was touring, he was doing the Bad tour. And I was imitating him as a dancer at that point. And he was holding these, it was in connection with Target or something like that, holding these dance, like, contests all around wherever he traveled. So I entered one of the dance contests and ended up winning it, went on to the finals and won that, and then the prize was to meet Michael. So I met him after one of his concerts in Brisbane, Australia. And it was just like in a meet and greet sort of room. And we met, and I was in my whole, bad outfit and everything. He was sort of laughing and tripping out on my outfit and asked if I danced. I said, yeah, and he asked me to perform with him in the show the next night. So after, it was like the end of the concert, I pulled up, performed in the show with him. I think within the next couple of days, my mother and I went to visit him at his hotel room, and we stayed for a couple of hours. It was in Brisbane, Australia. Just talking about what I want to do. And then that was kind of it at first. And then for the next 2 years, we didn't have any contact at all. And I continued pursuing my dance career in Australia. And then the company that I was with, the dance company, was traveling to America to do a performance at Disneyland. So we all went, came out, did that performance. As I said, we'd had no contact with Michael or anything. Somehow my mother got in contact with Michael's secretary at that time, who was Norma Stokes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the narrative form of the answer.
Sustained.
After your mother got in contact with Norma Stokes, what happened next?
She talked to Michael about, we wanted to see if we could hook up with him again and meet him again. She talked to Michael. Michael remembered me from when I met him when I was 5 years old, wanted to meet me again. So I was out there with my mother, sister, my father, and grandparents. We all went to meet him at Record One recording studios. And this was 89.
Where is Record One recording studios?
I don't remember exactly. It's somewhere in the valley, yeah. In California, yeah.
And what happened next?
We met up with him. He was in between, working on music and that sort of thing. He was doing a photo shoot at the time at the studio. We took some photos with him. My family and I all went into his, sort of like the green room, and played him some videotapes of all the dancing stuff that I've been doing over the last 2 years. And, he was just really excited, checking out everything I had done. And then by the end of the time, he invited my family and I up to the ranch that weekend.
And did you begin a friendship with Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Did you spend much time at Neverland?
Yeah, spent a lot of time, yeah.
When do you think you first went to Neverland?
It was right after that visit. I'm pretty sure it was that night that we went, my whole family went to the ranch. And, we stayed for, I don't know, about a week or something like that.
And approximately what year do you think you first went to Neverland, Mr. Robson?
That was 1989.
Okay, and who did you go to Neverland with the first time?
Went with my mother, my sister, my father, and my grandmother.
And how long did you stay during that first visit?
I think it was about a week.
And after you spent a week at Neverland, what did you do?
Went back to Australia.
Okay, did you see Mr. Jackson again?
Yeah, we would. I don't remember exact dates, but over the next 2 years, my mother and I would come out, I don't know, maybe twice a year, something like that, and spend a couple of weeks with Michael.
Would you spend the night at Neverland?
Some of it was at Neverland. Sometimes it would be at he had an apartment in I think it was Westwood at that point that we would stay at sometimes, too.
That's your mother and you would stay at the apartment in Westwood?
Yeah, that first time, I think a couple times, sometimes I would stay by myself. Always, I think, sometimes, most of the time my mother and I went to the ranch together. I think once I was there by myself without my mother. there was other people there.
And did you stay in contact Mr. Jackson through those years?
Yes.
And how would you communicate with Mr. Jackson?
When we weren't there, we'd talk on the phone or we'd send faxes back and forth.
At some point, did you move to the United States permanently?
Yeah, we moved in September of 1991. My mother and sister and I.
Have you lived here ever since?
Yes.
Have you lived in Los Angeles ever since?
Yes.
Now, your mother's name is?
Joy Robson.
And how about your sister?
Chantal Robson.
Okay, how many times do you think you've stayed at Neverland?
It's got to be somewhere in the 20s or something like that. Mid-20s.
And have you stayed there for varying periods of time?
Yeah. Most of the time it's usually like a weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
What's the longest amount of time, do you think, you've ever stayed at Neverland?
I would say a week to a week and a half.
Do you consider Michael Jackson your friend?
Yes.
Do you consider him a close friend?
Yes.
You're aware of the allegations in this case, are you not?
Yes.
And are you aware, as you sit here today, that there's been allegations that Mr. Jackson molested you?
Yes.
Mr. Robson, did Michael Jackson ever molest you at any time?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Robson, did Michael Jackson ever touch you in a sexual way?
Never, no.
Mr. Robson, has Mr. Jackson ever inappropriately touched any part of your body at any time?
No.
When you first visited Neverland, and I think you said it was about a week you and your mom stayed there.
Yeah.
Where did you stay?
I stayed in Michael's room.
And could you please describe the room for the jury?
When you walk in, there's a bed, sort of like the main bed, diagonally to your left. Wood floors. There's a second floor that you go around to the right and up, which also has another bed. There's a bathroom to the left. There's bathrooms on both sides of the main bed on the first floor.
And you stayed in Mr. Jackson's room?
Yes.
The first time you were there?
Yes.
To your knowledge, has your mother ever stayed in Mr. Jackson's room?
In the room? No.
How about your sister?
Yes.
And when do you recall your sister staying in the room?
On that first trip, the first time we went to Neverland.
Okay, what do you recall doing at Neverland during that first visit when you spent approximately a week?
Well, at that point he didn't have many of the rides. We would watch movies in the theater. We'd play video games. We'd drive around on the golf carts, look at the animals. Those sort of things.
Has Mr. Jackson ever helped you with your career?
Yes.
What has he done?
When I first moved out here, when I was 9, he put me in a couple of his music videos. I was in the Jam music video, Black or White music video, and Heal the World. And that sort of helped me get a dance agency, and yeah. And then the next thing, when I said I was in a rap duo when I was 11 and 12, that was on Michael Jackson's label under Sony.
Do you recall the second time you ever visited Neverland?
No, I don't.
Do you recall staying in Mr. Jackson's room on other occasions?
Yes.
And typically when you'd stay in Mr. Jackson's room, what would you do?
What would we do as far as just?
Sure, anything.
Yeah, we'd watch, same thing. We'd watch movies, we'd play video games, we'd have a pillow fight every now and then. We'd talk, hang out.
How many times do you think you've stayed in Mr. Jackson's room at Neverland?
Same amount of times as I've been there. Well, no, that's not true, I'm sorry. I've been there a bunch of times without Michael, just with other friends and family traveling there. But, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20.
And at no time has any sexual contact ever occurred between you and Mr. Jackson, right?
Never.
Have you ever taken a shower with Mr. Jackson?
No.
Have you ever gone swimming with Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
And please explain what you mean.
One time with my sister and I and Michael, we went in the jacuzzi at Neverland Ranch.
And do you know approximately when that was?
I don't. I can't say for sure. I have a feeling that it was within that first trip in '89 when I went there.
Do you recall what Mr. Jackson was wearing in the jacuzzi?
From my recollection, he was wearing shorts. Like swimming shorts. And that was it.
Did anything inappropriate ever happen in that jacuzzi?
No.
Has anything inappropriate ever happened in any shower with you and Mr. Jackson?
No. Never been in a shower with him.
Did you get to know any of the employees at Neverland when you were there?
I wouldn't say, get to know. You know, I knew of them and we'd know each other's names, but it never went beyond that.
Do you recall someone named Blanca Francia?
Yes, I remember her name. And I remember her presence. I can't place her. I can't remember what she looks like or anything like that.
Do you know whether or not Blanca Francia ever was in a room when you were with Mr. Jackson?
Not that I can remember.
Okay. Did you ever meet anyone named Ralph Chacon?
No.
How about Qasim Abdul?
No.
Do you recall anyone named Adrian McManus?
No.
Did you have much interaction with the security people when you were visiting and staying at Neverland?
No. The only interaction would be I don't know, if they were trying. If we were out, you know, watching a movie or something like that, they'd come tell us that dinner was ready or something like that. In later years, when I would go there and just visit with my family and that sort of thing, sometimes we'd have water fights and get the security involved. But other than that, no.
Did you come across anyone named Mrs. Chandler when you were at Neverland?
Yes.
And when do you think this was?
I think I was about 13. But I can't pinpoint anything more definitive than that. Around that time.
Do you recall ever seeing someone at Neverland talking to Mrs. Chandler?
Sorry? Can you repeat that?
Did you ever see Mrs. Chandler talking to anyone at Neverland?
Yeah. I mean, maybe chefs or maids or something like that.
What do you recall Mrs. Chandler doing at Neverland?
I think I mainly saw her if we'd sit down to eat dinner or something like that. That's the only time I saw her.
Did you ever see her ordering people around at Neverland?
Yeah, well.
I'm going to object as leading.
Sustained.
When you saw Mrs. Chandler talking to these people at Neverland, what do you recall her doing?
I'll object as irrelevant and vague.
There's been testimony by her, Your Honor, about what she saw.
I'll allow the question. You may answer. Do you want it read back?
Yes, please.
When you saw Mrs. Chandler talking to these people at Neverland, what do you recall her doing?
I remember her, ordering food, that sort of thing, from maids or chefs, or whatever. And, the thing I sort of noticed was she was always sort of, she would sort of act like the place was hers, sort of order people around a bit. And, I guess I noticed it because my mother, when we went there, she always made it really clear that this was Michael Jackson's house. This was somebody's house and
I'm going to object as non-responsive to the question and narrative.
All right. The last sentence is stricken.
Mr. Robson, has anyone told you what to say in this courtroom today?
No.
Is everything you've said the complete and honest truth?
Yes.
Did Mr. Jackson ever do anything wrong with you?
No.
No further questions.
Cross-examine?
Mr. Robson, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Have you been living in the United States continuously since you were 8 years old?
Yes.
Was Mr. Jackson instrumental in your being able to move to the United States to pursue your career?
Yes.
Are you grateful for Mr. Jackson's help and assistance in the development of your career?
Yes.
Did you go to high school or college at all?
No.
Not either one?
I didn't go to a public high school. I did home studies.
You did home studies all through high school?
Yeah.
And no college at all?
No.
So you began your dance career early on and continued through to today, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright. Now, the first time that you slept with Mr. Jackson you were 7 years old, is that correct?
I slept in the same bed with him. But, yes, I was 7.
Did you understand my question to mean something other than that?
Sounded like it.
Alright, but you slept in the same bed with him when you were 7 years old, is that correct?
Yes.
Was anybody else in that bed with you?
My sister, Chantal Robson.
She was 10 years old, is that right?
Yes.
Is it true that there was not another adult anywhere in that room at the time you crawled into bed with Mr. Jackson?
True.
And in fact, you continued to sleep with Mr. Jackson through the balance of that week during your 7th year, is that right?
Yes.
Was your sister there the entire time during that week as well?
Yes.
Was she in that bed with you as well?
Yes.
Did she continue to share a bed with you and Mr. Jackson thereafter, or did you sleep only with Mr. Jackson thereafter?
What do you mean by thereafter?
Well, on all the occasions that you returned to visit Mr. Jackson's ranch, did you stay in his room, by yourself, with him?
Yes. But my sister wasn't with us at all in America.
Alright, so when you moved here, and incidentally, your father was there during that first week when you were 7 years old, is that right?
Yes.
But your father did not return to visit thereafter?
No.
Alright, so you stayed in the United States. Your father stayed in Australia.
Yes.
Did your mother stay in the United States?
Yes.
For the balance of the next number of years, your father was simply not in the picture while you were in the United States, is that right?
He wasn't there with us, no.
And Mr. Jackson understood that as well, did he not, that your father was not in the picture while you were at Neverland?
Well, he understood that he wasn't there, yes.
Okay, and did you have any contact with your father at all?
Yes. We talked on the phone.
By telephone?
Yeah.
Did you visit him?
I'm sorry, are we talking about once I moved to America?
Yes.
Oh, yes, we would go back at least every 2 years for Christmas.
Did he ever come to the United States to visit you?
Yes.
Did he have any other visits with you at Neverland?
No.
Did you talk with your mother, prior to that first week that you slept with Mr. Jackson with your sister, about the sleeping arrangements at all?
Well, yeah, the first day that we got there, to Neverland Ranch, I think we got there in about the afternoon. We hung out a bit. When it was time to go bed, I asked Michael if I could stay with him in his room. And then Michael and I went to, Mom was staying in a guest room. We went to her room and I asked her. Michael asked her if that was okay. And she said yes.
Alright, now, you asked Michael Jackson if you could share his room with him. Now, what caused you to do that? You were 7 years old. What caused you to ask him if you could stay with him in his room?
Well, it's the same way with any child. When when you have a best friend or a new friend that you found, you always want to stay in the same room with them.
He was in his mid-30s, is that right?
Yes, I guess so.
Had you ever crawled into bed with a 30-year-old man prior to that day?
My father.
Okay.
But other than that, no.
Any person who you had just met?
No.
Alright, and in fact, throughout your entire adolescent years, you had never slept with any other man other than Michael Jackson and your father, is that correct?
Never slept in a bed with any other man, no.
Now, you had a conversation with your mother about where you would sleep that night, that first time. Again, you're 7 years old, is that right?
Yeah.
Did your mother talk to you about perhaps you should stay with her in the guest cottage?
No.
Was she the one who suggested that your sister should go with you and stay in that room with Mr. Jackson?
I don't remember that. I remember Chantal, my sister, wanted to as well.
Had your mother actually seen the room or the rooms that constitute Mr. Jackson's bedroom suite?
Yeah, when we first got to the ranch, he took us around, a tour around everywhere, in his room.
So she understood at the time that the bedroom suite was composed of a number of different rooms with actually beds in at least 2 of them, is that right?
Yes.
And there were bathrooms on both levels, is that right?
I don't think there's a bathroom on the second level. There's 2 on the first level.
Was your mother under the impression that you would be sleeping in a different location from Michael Jackson when you first went to his room at age 7?
Not that I know of.
Alright, had you talked with her the next day about where you actually slept that prior night?
No, not that I remember.
At any time during that first week when you were there at age 7, did you ever tell your mother that you actually shared the bed with Michael Jackson?
I'm sure.
You think you did?
Yeah.
Do you remember your mother's response to hearing that?
No.
Did your sister, in your presence, tell your mother that she was also sleeping in the same bed with Michael Jackson at age 10?
I can't say for sure. I don't remember, but.
At any time during that first week that you were there, did you have any conversation with your mother wherein your mother expressed concern about where you were sleeping?
No.
Were you seeing your mother during the day?
Yes.
Alright, After that first week, did you go back to Australia?
Yeah.
You were in Australia for what, about a year?
I think so. I don't remember.
And then you returned to the United States for good at that point?
Well, we had a couple of visits back to America before we returned in '91 for good.
With what rate of frequency did you continue to visit with Michael Jackson after returning at age 8?
I would say twice a year.
Alright, and during those periods of time, you would stay for up to a week at a time, no?
Yeah.
Were there times that you actually stayed at Neverland for many weeks at a time?
Not that I can remember. Like I said, a week to a week and a half. Maybe it was 2 weeks, but I don't remember any more than that.
Were there periods of time when you were at Neverland and working with Mr. Jackson on dance routines?
No, I mean, we would mess around and dance a little bit in the studio every now and then, yes.
Was there ever an occasion where you were on the dance floor with Mr. Jackson and he was showing you a routine and he grabbed your crotch in a manner similar to how he would grab his own crotch while doing those performances?
No, that's not true.
You have no recollection of that?
No.
That didn't happen?
No.
During the period of time from age 8 on, did you stay in Mr. Jackson's room virtually the entire time?
I'm sorry?
The times that you would come and visit Mr. Jackson from age 8 on.
Uh-huh.
Did you stay in Mr. Jackson's room?
Yes.
Alright. By age 11, you were asked to give a deposition, were you not?
Yes.
And you actually did give testimony under oath in the presence of 2 prosecutors from Los Angeles, is that right?
Yes.
There was also an attorney present who represented you, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright. After that deposition, did you continue to sleep in Mr. Jackson's room?
Yes.
Did you continue to sleep in Mr. Jackson's bed?
Yes.
Alright. Now, during that period of time from age 8 until age 11, did you frequently visit Mr. Jackson?
I'm sorry, from 8 to 11?
Age 8 to age 11, did you frequently visit Mr. Jackson?
Yeah, same amount of time. Maybe twice a year, or every couple of months, something like that.
Is it safe to say that during each of those visits, you stayed in Mr. Jackson's room?
Yes.
Alright. Were there ever occasions where you went to visit Mr. Jackson when your mother wasn't there?
Yes. I think a couple of times he had an apartment in Century City that my mother would drop me off and I'd stay for, a night or so by myself with Michael there.
Was that a place called The Hideout?
I remember a place called The Hideout. I don't remember if it was that place.
Were there more places where you visited and stayed overnight in Century City?
Yeah, there was a hotel that was, an apartment that was in Westwood and then one that was in Century City.
Was there a place where Mr. Jackson was living in, either Westwood or Century City, where there was a hotel across the street?
Yes.
And would it be the case that periodically you would visit him there, your mother would stay in the hotel, but you would stay with him in his room?
One time when we came over, we stayed. I think it was the Westwood apartment, his Westwood apartment. There was a Holiday Inn that was across and we stayed there most of the time. And then certain nights I would go over to Michael and stay with him.
Mr. Robson, were there ever occasions where you stayed with Michael Jackson where you didn't sleep with him in his bed?
Yes.
How often did that happen?
I don't know. Maybe 3, 4 times.
3 or 4 times over years we're talking about, is that right?
Yes.
So, for the most part, the overwhelming majority of times you shared his bed with him?
Yes.
Now, at any time did you start to develop conversations with your mother about the propriety of sleeping with this man who's now well into his 30s?
No.
Did you consider it unusual at all?
No.
Did your mother consider it unusual?
No.
Did you ever talk to your father about it?
Yeah.
You talked to your father about your sleeping with Michael Jackson?
No, everybody knew, and nobody ever said that it was. We never talked about it being unusual or anything like that.
Did your mother ever ask you if anything inappropriate happened in bed with him?
No.
Did she simply assume nothing happened?
Yes.
You're telling us nothing happened, is that right?
Yes.
Alright, what you're really telling us is nothing happened while you were awake, isn't that true?
I'm telling you that nothing ever happened.
Mr. Robson, when you were asleep, you wouldn't have known what had happened, particularly at age 7, would you have?
I would think something like that would wake me up.
On those occasions that you were at Neverland, you used to play very actively, did you not?
Yes.
Alright, there was a lot to do at Neverland, is that right?
Yes.
And on some days you were actually working out heavily with the defendant, engaged in dance routines, weren't you?
Yeah.
And on other occasions you would be playing very actively. There's just a host of things that a 7-year-old can do and have fun with, is that right?
Yes.
And you can play. All manner of video games that exist anywhere in the world can be found at Neverland, is that right?
Yeah.
And there's video games, there's movies, there's a zoo, there's all kinds of parks, and the trains. You're very active during the entire day, is that right?
Yes.
And at night you'd go back to his room and you'd play more video games or you'd watch television, is that right?
Yes.
And there's movies of any kind that you can see with Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Did your mother ever complain to you that you were losing contact with her and that she was losing her contact with you? Did she ever say that?
No.
In fact, she was very upset over the fact that she was losing her ability to have access to her son, wasn't she?
No.
Was there, in fact, a shower at Neverland in the suite, the bedroom suite?
Yes.
But you didn't use it?
I used it by myself.
Was he in the room while you were using it?
In the bedroom, not in the shower room, which had its own door.
You were 7 years old when you started using that shower, is that correct?
Yes.
When did you stop sleeping with Mr. Jackson?
I guess when I was about, I don't know, maybe 13, 14, something like that.
Why did you stop?
I didn't stop sleeping with him. I just haven't spent the night with him, I mean, in his room or anything like that since then, I don't think.
You haven't gone back to Neverland since you were 13?
I have. Not with him.
Have you gone back to Neverland since you were 13 and actually stayed overnight?
Yes.
On how many occasions since you were 13?
A lot. Same thing. 20, 25, something like that.
Did he take you to other locations such as Las Vegas?
Yes.
And while you were at Las Vegas, you went to see Siegfried and Roy?
Yes.
And being with Mr. Jackson back then was a very exciting experience, wasn't it?
Yes.
He was able to go anywhere he wanted in Las Vegas and take you with him?
Yeah.
Did you start to dress like him?
I always did before I met him.
Alright. And during the time that you were with him, he enjoyed you wearing clothing similar to what he wore, is that correct?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Did he ever tell you that he wanted you to dress like him?
No.
Did he ever give you hats similar to the type of hats that he wears?
Because I would ask for them.
And did you, in fact, wear those types of hats when you were out with him?
Yes.
And when you were in Las Vegas, did you wear those hats as you wandered around Las Vegas with him?
Yes.
When you were in Las Vegas, where did you stay?
We stayed at the Mirage Hotel.
Who went to Las Vegas with you?
My mother.
Just your mother?
Yeah.
Was your sister with you at all?
No.
Did your sister move to the United States with you?
Yes.
But she didn't go to Las Vegas with you?
Well, we didn't live in the United States at that point. We still lived in Australia. We were out on a visit.
When you were in the hotel in Las Vegas, it is true that you stayed with Mr. Jackson in his bed.
Yes.
And your mother stayed in a separate room, is that right?
Yes.
Now, were there other boys that you knew about who were sleeping with Michael Jackson during that time?
No, not that I knew of. I mean, the only other time I was around other boys, other kids at the ranch, I think once or twice, and, you know, we'd all stay in the room and we'd kind of fall asleep on couches, beds, cots, wherever they were.
Did you know Jordy Chandler?
Yeah.
You just described. You just told the jury that you knew Jordy Chandler's mother, is that right?
Yes.
What's her name?
I know her, June. June Chandler.
Alright, describe her for us. What does she look like?
She has dark, almost black hair. Sort of brown eyes. I think kind of like a little bit of a darker complexion.
Slim woman? Heavy woman?
Slim woman.
Now, do you remember her son Jordy?
Yes.
On how many occasions did you meet Jordy?
Once.
Only one time?
That's all I can remember, yes.
And did you spend the night with Jordy?
Yeah. We all stayed in Michael's room.
You say, we all stayed. Were there other people there besides Jordy?
Yeah. Macaulay Culkin was there and his brother Kieran Culkin.
Now, Macaulay Culkin has sisters, does he not?
I don't know.
Were there any girls that were staying with you that night?
Not that I remember.
Were there ever any girls, other than your sister, at age 7, who actually spent the night in Mr. Jackson's room with you during the years that you knew him and spent the night in his room?
Yes.
Who?
There was Brandy Jackson.
I'm sorry?
Brandy Jackson, who is Michael's niece.
And she spent the night on how many occasions with you?
Only one that I can remember.
One night?
Yeah.
Alright, so we're talking about a period of about 5 years, is that right?
Yeah.
In the 5 years, you can remember Brandy. Who else do you recall?
As far as females?
Yes.
My sister, Brandy. That's all I remember.
Now, your sister actually never went back into that room and spent the night with you after that first week when you were 7, is that correct?
Yeah. Not that I can remember.
Is it an accurate statement to say that the boys who stayed there for long periods of time started getting pretty rowdy?
Rowdy?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, goof off, and simply kids who weren't under a lot of supervision.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you know, boys will be boys. We'd go around and have fun.
Loud and boisterous?
Yes.
And on occasions break things?
Accidentally, yeah.
And be somewhat disobedient?
Some of them maybe.
Were there ever occasions where you and Mr. Jackson were throwing stones at the lion in the zoo?
Stones at the lion. Yeah, I think so.
That did happen, didn't it?
Yeah.
Mr. Jackson was throwing stones at the lion in your presence, is that right?
Yes.
Was he encouraging you to do the same thing?
Yeah, little pebbles, but, yeah.
They weren't exactly pebbles. They were good-sized stones, weren't they?
No, I remember small stones.
It was designed to irritate the lion, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were trying to get him to make some noise.
Because it was entertaining to Mr. Jackson and to you?
Yeah.
How old were you at the time?
I think I would have been 7 or 8.
Were there any other kids around at that time?
No, maybe my sister.
Now, you said that you spent one night that you can recall with Jordy Chandler. Do you know Brett Barnes?
Yes.
Did you ever spend a night with Brett Barnes?
No.
Did you ever meet Brett Barnes?
Yes.
How old were you when you met Brett Barnes?
I think I would have been 9. It was soon after we moved to America.
On that occasion when you spent the night with Jordy Chandler, Macaulay, and his brother, was Brett Barnes there as well?
No.
Do you know if Brett Barnes spent nights with Michael Jackson?
I don't know.
Do you know if they ever shared a bed?
I don't know.
Did Michael Jackson ever talk to you about the propriety of sleeping with him?
Could you rephrase that?
Did Michael Jackson ever have a conversation with you wherein the subject of the conversation was that it was okay for you to sleep with a 30-something-year-old man?
Yeah.
He did?
We would both talk about it.
Really? From what age? When did that first conversation happen?
I don't remember.
Were you 7?
I don't remember.
Was it the first week that you were there?
No.
Do you think it was soon after you moved to the United States?
I really don't remember.
What was the nature of that conversation?
I don't remember an exact conversation. I'm sure it's just something, you know, we talked about at some point. That, you know, that it's fine.
Did Mr. Jackson ever tell you that you were family to him?
Yes.
Did he tell you that often?
Yes.
Did he tell you that he would take care of you?
No.
Did he tell you he would protect you?
Yes.
All right. Did he ever tell your mother in your presence that you were family?
Yes.
And that your mother could trust him?
Yes.
In fact, the word trust came up in many conversations with Michael Jackson, did it not?
Yeah, we'd talk about trust in, you know, other people, and that sort of thing.
But he encouraged you particularly to trust in him, did he not?
No, there was no particular emphasis on it.
How much time did you spend with Macaulay Culkin?
There was the trip that we spoke of, that I think was a couple of days. I think I was with him one other time at the Century City apartment, which was a night. I think that was about it.
Now, the trip you described, that trip was where now?
Which trip?
Maybe I misheard you. Did you say, the trip I just spoke of?
Oh, the one I spoke of. That was the one where I said where Geordie Chandler was there at Neverland.
That was Neverland?
Yeah.
He was there and you were there for what period of time together? Just one night?
No, it was a couple days.
Did it go over more than one night?
Yes.
On both of those nights, did both of you spend that time in Mr. Jackson's room?
Yes.
Now, did either one of you actually spend the night in Mr. Jackson's bed with Mr. Jackson?
No, I think, from I can remember, I can only remember one night in particular, and I remember myself and Kieran Culkin, I think, slept on Michael's bed, and Michael slept on a cot, or something, on the side of us, and I don't know, Macaulay fell asleep on a couch or something.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, no.
The Century City apartment, I believe you said you spent some time there with Macaulay Culkin as well?
Yeah, I think it was one night there, yeah.
Was his brother there?
I don't remember for sure. I don't remember him being there.
Mr. Jackson would periodically kiss you, would he not?
No.
Periodically hug you?
Yes.
Touch you?
Hug me, that would be.
Put his hands through your hair?
No.
Touch you about the head and the face?
Yeah.
Did he ever kiss you on the cheek?
Yeah.
Did he ever kiss you on the lips?
No.
Do you remember any other children being there about that time?
Which time?
From the time that you were 7 until the time you stopped sleeping there at age 13.
Being at the ranch?
Yes.
Other than we spoke of, no.
Did you know Blanca Francia's son?
No, I knew of him, but I don't think I ever met him.
What was his name?
I don't know.
Does Jason sound familiar?
Yes, but I think because I've heard it recently. But, yeah.
Now, were there ever occasions after you were 14 years old that you came and stayed at Neverland Ranch and Michael Jackson was, in fact, there?
Yes.
And you did not stay with him in his room?
The only time I can remember was a time I went up there with a few family members and friends, and we didn't know he was going to be there. And, you know, we sort of ran into him and hung out a bit, and, no, I didn't sleep in his room.
Did you ever talk to Michael Jackson about the fact that at some age it was too late for you to be sleeping with him?
No.
Did you ever have a conversation with him about whether or not you should continue to sleep in his bed?
No.
Remember the last time you slept in his bed?
The last, I think it might have been when I was about 14. It was at a Sheraton hotel in Los Angeles.
And how did you happen to be there with him?
I stayed with him for I think it was just one night.
Did you call or did he call you?
I don't remember.
Was your mother there?
No.
Do you remember how you got there?
No, I don't.
Were there occasions that Mr. Jackson would summon you to Neverland Ranch?
Summon me?
Yes. Call you up and ask you to come and be there. Invite you to Neverland Ranch?
Invite us, yeah.
Alright. Without your mother?
Like ask if I could come without my mother, do you mean?
Or just ask you to come, and you came by yourself?
The only time I remember being there, the only time I remember being there was that trip that we spoke of by myself with Geordie Chandler and Macaulay.
On the occasions that you stayed in bed with Mr. Jackson, would you ever cuddle in bed?
No.
Would you lie next to one another?
No.
Would you touch?
No.
Would you consider it to have been inappropriate to have cuddled in bed?
Sorry?
Would you have considered it to be inappropriate to have cuddled in bed?
No.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Robson, the prosecutor for the government asked you about your dressing like Michael Jackson.
Uh-huh.
And I believe you said something about you dressed like him before you met him.
Yes.
Would you please explain that?
Well, you know, I became a fan of Michael Jackson when I was 2 years old, when I saw the making of Thriller, and started dancing like him when I was, 3 or 4. So I think when I was about 5, I started, because I was imitating him. I got costumes made and that sort of thing. So I would dress like him from that point, before I met him.
Did Mr. Jackson ever encourage you to dress like him?
No.
Did you dress like him because you were a fan and friend of his?
Yes.
Now, the prosecutor talked about your throwing pebbles at a lion.
Uh-huh.
Would you please explain what you were describing?
Well, there's a lion that was in a cage. And, went to see the lion roar, and it's pretty much just sitting there, not doing anything. So we picked up a couple little stones and threw them at the cage,
And the prosecutor used the word stones, and you said pebbles. How big were these things?
Little, I don't know, quarter-inch sort of things.
Were you trying to hurt the lion?
No.
To your knowledge, was Mr. Jackson trying to hurt the lion?
No.
Okay. The prosecutor asked you questions about whether or not you were considered family. Did you consider yourself to be part of Mr. Jackson's family?
Yeah, in a friendship sort of way. Because we were that close. It was like family.
And did you use the word family once in a while?
Yes.
When you spoke to him?
Yes.
Did you hear your mother or sister using the word family?
Yes.
Did you think anything was strange about that?
No.
The prosecutor for the government asked about Mr. Jackson giving you a kiss on the cheek.
Uh-huh.
And you said that happened sometimes?
Yes.
Did you think there was anything inappropriate about that?
No.
Did you do it in front of your mom?
Yes.
Did you do it in front of your sister?
Yes.
Did your mother kiss him on the cheek?
Yes.
Did your sister kiss him on the cheek?
Yes.
Did you kiss Mr. Jackson on the cheek?
Yes.
Did your mother used to hug Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Did Mr. Jackson used to hug your mother?
I'll object as irrelevant what happened with his mother.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Did Mr. Jackson used to hug your mother?
Yes.
Did your sister used to hug Mr. Jackson?
I'll object as leading as well.
Overruled.
Did your sister used to hug Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
And would you see Mr. Jackson hug your sister?
Yes.
Did you ever think there was anything inappropriate about Mr. Jackson hugging any member of your family?
No.
Did you ever think it was inappropriate to see any member of your family hug Mr. Jackson?
No.
Now, you said your sister would sometimes stay in Mr. Jackson's room, correct?
Yes.
And how often do you recall that happening?
I remember it just within that first trip we were there. So it was, 3 or 4 nights or something like that.
And you mentioned Brandy. Is that who you mentioned?
Yes.
Who was Brandy again?
She was Michael Jackson's niece.
You saw Brandy staying in his room?
Yeah.
What's the largest number of kids you ever saw stay in Mr. Jackson's room, if you remember?
Yeah, probably 4 to 5.
And what do you recall the children doing in his room?
Well, before we went to sleep, same sort of things. We'd play video games, watch movies, have pillow fights. Yeah.
Did you ever see anything of a sexual nature between Mr. Jackson and any of those children?
Never.
Now, the prosecutor mentioned Macaulay Culkin. Did you get to know Macaulay Culkin at Neverland?
Yeah, we hung out a little bit, yes.
Was that where you first met him?
I think I might have met him on a set of a commercial or one of his videos or, no, I think I met him on Black or White, the first time, the music video.
Did you stay in contact with Mr. Culkin?
No.
Is he someone you communicate with on a regular basis?
No.
Okay, now, would you see Mr. Culkin's family at Neverland?
Other than his brother Kieran, I don't remember.
And approximately how old was his brother, do you think?
At that time, he would have been, I guess, 9 or 10, or something like that.
Have you seen Mr. Jackson hug other children at Neverland?
Yes.
Have you seen other children hug Mr. Jackson at Neverland?
Yes.
Have you ever thought any of this was inappropriate?
No.
Have you seen Mr. Jackson kiss children at Neverland?
On the cheek, yes. Or on the head, or on the top of the head, something like that.
Ever seen kids kiss Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Any of that ever look inappropriate to you?
No.
Have you seen lots of children visit Neverland on occasion?
Yes.
And what do you mean?
I think we were there once when he had one of his gatherings, like a Heal the World Foundation thing where he had a bunch of kids come up there and, and have the day there.
And how many kids are you talking about, do you think?
Probably about 100 or 50. 75 to 100, something like that.
Were there adults with those children?
Yes.
And you said, heal the world. What did that mean to you?
I'm going to object as exceeding the scope of the direct examination, and irrelevant, and beyond the scope of his knowledge.
Overruled. You may answer.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. What was heal the world, as far as you remember?
As far as I knew, it was a foundation or a charity that Michael had created that, raised money for kids with illnesses. I don't know exactly what kind, but.
Did you interact with any of these kids that visited that day?
I may have, waved at them or met a couple of them or something like that.
Did you see Mr. Jackson hugging other children?
Yes.
Did you see them hugging him?
Yes.
Did you see Mr. Jackson kiss children?
Yeah.
Have you seen them kiss him?
Yes.
Ever seen anything inappropriate?
No.
Did you see Mr. Jackson hug adults who were with those children?
Yes.
Did you see adults hug Mr. Jackson who were with those children?
Yes.
Ever think any of that was inappropriate?
No.
Now, the prosecutor for the government asked you questions about whether he touched your hair.
Uh-huh.
Do you recall Mr. Jackson ever touching your hair?
I can't recall an exact thing, but it seems like something he might have done at some point.
Do you ever recall Mr. Jackson doing anything inappropriate with your hair?
No.
Ever seen Mr. Jackson touch another child on the head?
Yes.
Have you seen that many times?
Many times.
Did it ever seem like anything inappropriate was going on when you saw that?
No.
The prosecutor asked about disobedience at Neverland, and you said you did see kids act up sometimes?
Yeah, act up as far as kids go. Driving golf carts around and throwing water balloons at each other, and things that, I don't know, maybe parents would get upset about at some point, but that was the extent of it.
And did you engage in some of that, too?
Yes.
Did you ever see Michael Jackson in a water balloon fight with kids?
Yes.
Ever see kids throw water balloons at Michael?
Yes.
Ever see Michael throw water balloons at kids?
Yes.
Did you ever see Michael in golf carts with kids?
Yes.
When you used to play at Neverland during the day, would Michael often be with you?
Yes.
And what would Michael do with you?
We'd go on rides together, where we'd drive around in the golf cart together, look at animals together, watch movies together.
Did you see Mr. Jackson act in a similar way with other children?
Yes.
Ever see anything inappropriate go on when he was doing any of these things?
No.
Now, how often do you recall your mother going to Neverland with you?
It's been every time except for that one time that I spoke of when I was there with Geordie Chandler and Macaulay and I.
What do you recall seeing your mother do at Neverland?
A lot of the same things with us.
Would she sometimes be with Mr. Jackson when all the kids were playing?
Oh, yes, she was playing along with us.
Now, you mentioned visiting an apartment in Century City with Mr. Jackson, right?
Yes.
And what do you recall doing in the apartment with Mr. Jackson?
Same sort of things. He had arcade games there. Candy. We'd eat, we'd watch, TV shows, Stooges. Hang around, play games,
Did you ever see Mr. Jackson do anything inappropriate with any child at that apartment?
No.
Where else have you been with Mr. Jackson?
Like I said, we covered Las Vegas. Westwood apartment, Century City apartment, Sheraton Hotel. He came and stayed at my place once.
Where was that?
That was in Hollywood. It was. My mother and I had a condo, and my sister.
Did you see Mr. Jackson do anything inappropriate at any of these locations?
No.
Ever seen Mr. Jackson touch any child in a sexual way at any of these locations?
Never.
Did Mr. Jackson ever touch you inappropriately in any of these locations?
No.
Now, have you been following media reporting in this case?
Yeah, on and off.
You're aware of allegations that were made that Mr. Jackson.
I'm going to object as leading and exceeding the scope of the direct cross.
I don't know what the question is yet.
Okay, you've been following these reports that somehow Mr. Jackson was seen inappropriately touching you?
Yes.
What do you think of them?
I think it's.
I'll object. I'll withdraw the objection.
I think it's ridiculous.
No further questions.
When Mr. Jackson stayed with you at your Hollywood apartment, how old were you?
I would say 11 or 12.
Did he share your bed with you at that time?
Yes.
All right. There was one bed that you had in your room, is that correct?
No, it was like a futon that was our couch down in the living room.
So both of you stayed on the couch in the living room?
Yes.
Was that couch your normal residence? Was that where you normally slept?
I think that's where I was sleeping at that point, yeah.
You think that's where you were sleeping?
Yes.
You slept in other rooms at different times?
Yeah.
Now, all those places that you mentioned are all places that you mentioned, a series of places, you had been with Michael Jackson. On all of those occasions you slept in the same bed with him, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you think that's appropriate, for a 35-year-old man to be sleeping with an 8-year-old boy?
I don't see any problem with it.
Suppose the 35-year-old man has an obsession for sexually explicit material. Would that change your view?
Objection. 352.
It's in evidence.
Calls for speculation. Assumes facts not in evidence.
I'm going to sustain the objection because of the use of the term obsession.
If you knew that the person, the 35-year-old man who was sleeping with an 8-year-old boy, possessed a great quantity of sexually explicit material, would that cause you concern about that person's motivations while he was in bed with the boy?
Yes.
No further questions.
If you had known Michael Jackson, as a grown man, was reading Playboy, Hustler, Penthouse, magazines like that showing naked women, would that have concerned you?
No, that's what I was going to say afterward. Depends on what kind of material, what kind of pornographic material you were talking about.
Would that have concerned you?
No.
No further questions.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
I'd like to show you a couple exhibits, 841 and 842, that have been shown previously in this court to this jury. Let's start with one titled, Boys Will Be Boys. I'd like you to take a look at a few of the pages. Just go ahead and start turning pages, please. Stop there for a moment. Would you describe the picture on the right side?
There's a young boy with his legs open and he's naked.
Alright, the picture prominently displays his genitalia, does it not?
Yes.
That boy looks, to you, to be approximately how old?
Maybe 11 or 12.
That's how old you were when you were sleeping with Michael Jackson, is that right?
Yes.
Go ahead and flip a couple of more pages, if you would. You can stop right there, the next page. What's the picture on the left show?
Just a young boy who's naked standing on a rock.
His genitalia is prominently displayed in that picture, is that correct?
Yes.
Appears that that child is about the same as the other one?
Yes.
Flip a couple more pages. Please keep going. Okay. Stop right there. What's in that 2 pages, series of 2 pages?
There's a boy, about the same age, 11 or 12, who's naked.
Alright, and in those pictures his genitalia is prominently displayed as well, is that correct?
Yes.
In fact, if you'll take just a second and strum through the balance of that book, you can do it fairly rapidly, if you would. You don't have to go page by page, but as you wish. Is it true, Mr. Robson, that all of the pictures in that book are of boys about the same age?
Yes.
10, 11, 12 years old?
Yes.
And that many of the photographs, if not most of the photographs, depicted in that book are of boys nude, is that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, in most of those pictures, the genitalia is prominently displayed, is that right?
Yes.
Would you be concerned with a person who possesses a book like that?
No.
Would you be concerned about having your 12-year-old child in bed with a person who possesses a book like that?
No.
You would have no such concern?
No. To me, it's not a pornographic book. It's sort of, I don't know, just a book.
I'd like to show you Exhibit 596, please. Take a moment and look at that book. Let's stop there for a moment. That's the first, in fact, picture in that book, is that correct?
I didn't notice, no. Do you want me to go to the first picture?
No, you can pick any picture, actually. Just go ahead and open the book at random. Right there.
Oh, sorry.
Is it a fact, as you look through that book? What is depicted in that book throughout that book are a series of photographs of two men engaged in sex acts with one another?
Yes.
And in fact, the sex acts are all acts of either masturbation, oral sex or sodomy, is that right?
From what I saw, yes.
And sodomy, as you understand, is an act of anal sex, is that correct?
Yes.
Would you be concerned about a person who possesses that book crawling into bed with a 10-year-old boy?
Yes, I guess so.
No further questions.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Robson, I want to show you exhibit number 841. It says, boys will be boys. Do you see this?
Yes.
Okay, now, I'd like you to read the inscription on that book, okay? Read it out loud, if you would.
Okay, look at the true spirit of happiness and joy in these boys' faces. This is the spirit of boyhood, a life I never had and will always dream of. This is the life I want for my children. MJ.
Having read that inscription and having looked at this book, would you have any concern being in bed with Michael Jackson if you knew this book was found in his home?
No.
Let me show you exhibit number 842. Please read out loud the inscription on that book.
Is that, to Michael? Yeah, to Michael, from your fan. Kiss, 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 hug, hug, hug. Rhonda. 1983.
You've looked through that book. Okay. And it says, The Boy, a photographic essay, right?
I didn't look through that book.
Okay. Why don't you look through this book the prosecutor showed you, and please say whether or not you would have a problem being in the same bedroom with Michael Jackson based upon what you see in that book and the inscription.
No.
Okay. Now, let me show you. Let me show you exhibit number 596 that the prosecutor showed you. Just read the cover, if you would.
Man, a sexual study of man. Illustrated with photographs and art prints.
Okay, now, you've seen those photographs, and you've said you were somewhat disturbed by the pictures, right?
Well, I wasn't disturbed by the pictures.
Well, if you read this book, and it appeared to be a book dealing with male sexuality in all different areas, and you knew that this book existed with hundreds of editions of Hustler, Playboy, Penthouse.
I'm going to object as leading.
Would that bother you?
I'm going to object as leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Can you repeat it?
Sure. Let's assume that you learned that Michael Jackson had 10 years worth of Hustler, Playboy, Penthouse. Okay. Magazines, heterosexual type magazines, and let's assume that. Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson's library?
Yes.
How many books do you think are in there?
Thousands.
And let's suppose in the middle of all those books you found a sexual study of man, illustrated with photographs and art prints, okay?
Yes.
Putting all this together, would being in bed with Mr. Jackson concern you?
No.
No further questions.
Of course nobody's told you where this book comes from, did they?
No.
Ron?
It's time for the break.
It's not 1:45.
My bailiff told me.